Hello everyone. In this video we will continue working together on Grammar Handout 1. If you haven't watched the first video, stop this video now and watch the first one. Okay, so on the handout we have a text, but let's have a look at this concept. The daycare dilemma. So, what is the daycare dilemma? Now, mothers and fathers, when they have to choose where to send their children for daycare centres, they have a lot of questions. For example, as you can see on the left, there is a very strict teacher. On the right, there's a very friendly caregiver. Now, in the daycare centre, will there be very strict caregivers? Will there be very friendly caregivers? We can see that there is a child on the bottom left who's not looking very happy. On the other picture, we can see that there's a child who luckily is not looking at the camera because she doesn't believe that Instagram is the most important thing in her life. Now this is the daycare dilemma, the questions the parents have about daycare centres. So, what do parents want to know about daycare centres? Well, obviously many things. One very important thing can be the cost of the daycare centre. Another very important thing can be the behaviour of the caregivers. Is the caregiver too strict? Is the caregiver too relaxed? Is the caregiver friendly? Etc, etc. Another interesting topic can be the solutions of the centre if the child is ill. If your child gets ill, is the caregiver going to take care of him or her? Are they going to send him or her to a doctor? Etc, etc. Another important thing is the number of children in the daycare centre. Because of course, having many children in the daycare centre means that it's more difficult for caregivers to take care of children. Now, why are we talking about this? Because on the grammar handout there is a very interesting text. This text, called daycare, is obviously about daycare centres. Now, what is the task? The task is read the text about daycare centres and find all the questions the parents ask. Stop the video, look at the text, find the questions, and then start the video again and we will look at the questions together. Okay, so, did you find the questions? As you can see, there are many questions in paragraph 2. What does the caregiver do to spend time with children? Does the caregiver hug the child, talk to the child, smile at the child, or play with the child? In paragraph 3 we have other questions, for example, who takes care of sick children at the centre? And these are all very important questions. Now, did you find the hidden questions in the text? I'll show you one. For example, how much it costs. Now, of course, this is not a question, because you don't have a question mark, but it's a very important problem. They usually want to know how much it costs, they being the parents. Now, there are other hidden questions in this text. For example, if the caregiver is loving, or what the centre does when the child is ill, or who will take care of the child when he or she is ill, or how many children there are per caregiver. Now, all of these are noun clauses. All of these questions are noun clauses. Now let's look. How much does it cost? Is the caregiver loving? Now obviously these are questions. Now let's look at the next one. Parents usually want to know how much it costs. Parents need to know if the caregiver is loving. Now the meaning is very similar, but the form is very different. So what is the difference between the first group of sentences and the second group? Well, the difference is that the first group are direct questions, while the second group are sentences which contain noun clauses. Let's look at it together. It is the subject of how much does it cost. The subject of the second question is the caregiver. The verb of the first sentence is cost, the verb of the second sentence is, and as you can see, does is the auxiliary, loving is the adjective, so they are written in question form. Now, what is the difference between the first group and the second group? In the second group, parents is the subject, usually want to know is the verb plus the infinitive, and how much it costs is the object, because that is a noun clause. Let's look at the next sentence. Parents is the subject, need to know, verb plus infinitive. If the caregiver is loving, that's the noun clause. So what's the difference? The first group are direct questions. In the second group, In the first one, we have question word noun clause, because how much it costs comes from how much does it cost. In the second one, we have an if whether noun clause. So today, we're going to look at two different kinds of noun clauses. One, question word noun clauses, and the other one, if whether noun clauses. Okay, let's start with question word noun clauses. Question word noun clauses are noun clauses which begin with a question word. So let's look at these examples. What should working mothers do? Now in this case, should is a modal verb, working mothers is the subject. In the sentence which contains the noun clause, we have I don't know, that's the first part, I is the subject, don't know is the verb, and then we have the noun clause, what working mothers should do. Now as you can see, they're very different, because in the first one, it's a question. In the second one, we don't have the question form, because working mothers is the subject, should do is the verb. The modal and verb 1 are together. Let's look at the next example. Where is the daycare centre? In this case, is the verb. The daycare centre is the subject. That is the question form, because it's the verb to be. Now let's look at the sentence with the noun clause. Can you tell me? That is a question. And the noun clause, we have where the daycare centre is. Now in this case, the daycare centre is the subject and is the verb. Let's continue. When do the children have lunch? Again, do is the auxiliary, the children is the subject, and have is the verb. Now in the noun clause, we have we, subject, want to learn, the verb plus the infinitive, and when the children have lunch. Now in the noun clause, when the children have lunch, the children is the subject and have is the verb. What does your child want? That's a question form, auxiliary, subject. In the noun form part, do you know? That's the question. Your child is the subject and wants is the verb. When did your child start to talk? Did is the auxiliary, your child is the subject. Do you remember? That's part of the question. When your child is the subject, started is the verb. So as you can see, what is the difference? The first group are written in question form because they are direct questions. In the second group, we have a main clause, I don't know. Can you tell me? We want to learn. Do you know? Do you remember? And all of these parts have an object, and the object is the noun clause. And the important thing to remember is this: the noun clause is written in affirmative form because it is not a question. Can you tell me is a question. Do you know is a question. Do you remember is a question. But the noun clause is not a question. The noun clause is an object, so it should not be written in affirmative form. Now let's look what happens with subject questions. Now subject questions are different. For example, who informs the parents about the changes in the centre? Or, how many people take care of the children? Or, very simple, what happened? Now these questions are different. Why? Because the subject of the question is the question word. For example, who? That is the subject. Or in the next one, how many people? That's the subject. Or in the last one, what happened? What is the subject? Therefore, these are subject questions. Now, you should know that in subject questions, the form is not the question form, it's the affirmative form, the positive form. Now, obviously, when we take a direct question and we make a noun clause from that direct question, we don't have to change the form because it is already affirmative. These are written in affirmative form because they're subject questions. And the noun clause, as you can see, you don't have to change the form because it's already affirmative. Now this part of the handout is very interesting because it talks about some commonly used phrases to introduce noun clauses. Normally we use noun clauses with question words after, for example, I don't know, or nobody knows, or I'd like to know, or please tell me. Now, as an extra exercise, stop the video and try writing some examples with these phrases, just to practice. Okay, and finally we have the third group of noun clauses which begin with whether or if. Now in this case, this is very interesting. Let's look at the direct question. Will the children be safe? Is this daycare centre good? Does the daycare centre have a lot of toys? Did you like the daycare centre? Now, all of these questions are very similar. Why? Because they are all yes or no questions. As you can see, there is no question word. There is no where. There is no how. There is no why. These are all yes or no questions. Now, when you take a yes or no question and you want to make a noun clause from a yes or no question, we use if or whether in English. For example, will the children be safe? I can say, I want to know if the children will be safe. Or, I want to know whether the children will be safe. Now, please remember, on the left we have questions. Obviously, in the noun clause we have to use the affirmative form. So, does the daycare centre have a lot of toys? Becomes, I wonder if the daycare centre has a lot of toys. All of these noun clauses include the conjunction if or whether to say that in these questions there are two possible answers, yes or no. Now, generally you will find that if is more common in speech, whether generally is quite formal, so it's used in formal situations and in academic writing. Now, one important rule about whether or if noun clauses is the use of or not. We use or not to stress, to emphasize that there are two possibilities. For example, will the children be safe? There are two possibilities. The children will be safe, the children won't be safe. I can make a sentence with, I want to know whether the children will be safe or not. Or, I want to know if the children will be safe or not. I can also say, I want to know whether or not the children will be safe. So I'm using or not to stress that there are two options. Now, what is important is this: you cannot use or not after if. I want to know if or not the children, unfortunately, is not possible. So you can use whether, the sentence, and then or not. You can use if, the sentence, and or not. You can say whether or not, and then the sentence, but we cannot say if or not. So do not use or not after if. Now, be careful, this is very special. It's a very interesting case. We don't use or not when the question already includes the two options. I'll give you an example. Are men or women better caregivers? We don't know this. Now, in this question, of course, this is a yes or no question, but we already have the two options, men and women. So, how do we form the noun clause? We say, we don't know whether or if men or women are better caregivers. I repeat, we don't know whether men or women are better caregivers, or we don't know if men or women are better caregivers. Now, in this case, the first option is men, the second option is women. We cannot use or not. We don't use or not in this particular situation because we already have the two options. So, that's the end of part 2. I hope the videos were useful for you. Don't forget the exercises, and always remember, answering correctly isn't important, learning from mistakes is important. See you!